Chapter 273, Handing Out a Formula. Wednesday night, 5 minutes to 8, in an alley behind Braveheart's bar. Klein circled around for a while based on his memories, before finally finding the house with the dark candlelights. He was disguised today in a grayish-blue worker's uniform, cap, and a beard so that no one would connect him to the guy who had tried his luck by buying Black Snake's item. It would be best if Eye of Wisdom and the apothecary don't recognize me. Otherwise, a newbie who had relied on luck to become a Beyonder and was able to come up with several potions after a week would definitely be suspicious. Klein put his hands in his pockets and felt for Azek's copper whistle, the ordinary tarot cards, and the charms he had replenished. His uniform was specially modified by a tailor. There were many small pockets with metal bottles filled with herbs powder and extract essence. After taking a deep breath and slowly exhaling, Klein took out the metal mask that could only cover half his face and finished the first step to his disguise. Following that, he used the clown's ability to control his facial expression and his physical tics, as well as his gait while numbing his facial nerves. He wanted to be vastly different from his previous self. However, I'm not sure what Eye of Wisdom relies on to recognize people. This is all I can do. Sigh, if only I was already a faceless. But if that's the case, I wouldn't need to join such low-level Beyonder gatherings. Klein stood outside the door in silence for a few seconds. He then raised his right hand and knocked on the door, 7 hard knocks and 1 light one, with 6 long pauses and 1 short pause in between. Almost without waiting, the small wooden board on the door was silently pulled open, and an eye appeared behind it. It examined the visitor from head to toe. 2 or 3 seconds later, the door creaked open, and Eye of Wisdom's attendant handed a hooded black robe to Klein. Klein maintained his emotionless state as he quickly put on the robe and pulled down his hood, letting the shadows cover his face. On the way to the living room, he deliberately took steps he wasn't used to and tried his hardest to eliminate the awkwardness. There was only 1 candle in the dark and silent room and quite a number of members at the gathering. Klein didn't choose a corner like the previous time. Instead, he sat on a high stool right in the center. In short, he wanted everything about his external appearance and behavior to be completely different from the previous 2 times. And it was precisely due to his identity as a clown that gave him this domain of expertise, allowing him to reflect his own body into his mind and gain fundamental control over it. The living room was so silent that it appeared frozen. Time passed by, and finally, Eye of Wisdom looked at the clock on the wall and said in his ancient voice, "It's time. Let's begin. We don't need to wait for our late friends." Just as he finished his sentence, Klein immediately said with a hoarse voice, "I want to sell potion formulas. They are Sequence 9 Bard and Sequence 8 Light Suppliant from the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun. The former is 220 pounds, and the latter is 450 pounds. This was the most suitable plan that he could come up with after much consideration. The Spectator and the Telepathist potions were related to the Psychology Alchemists, a secret organization that was still active in Backland in the Lone Kingdom. If he recklessly produced them, he might attract their attention. And the Church of Eternal Blazing Sun was blocked out by the Church of Storms, so the corresponding Beyonders rarely appeared in Backland and could do very little. Therefore, it was an extremely safe choice. The potion of the Seer pathway involved Klein himself, and he certainly didn't want to reveal his characteristics. After having experienced so many battles and watched so many battles with Beyonders, he gradually came to understand something. It was that below the high sequences, Beyonders of different pathways had their own characteristics which didn't overlap. That was to say, each of them had their own strengths and weaknesses, and their strengths and weaknesses were all very obvious. The strengths were indeed strong, and the weaknesses were indeed weak. For example, the Spectator pathway lacked the ability to fight in actual combat, but if they were ignored and were unconsciously misled, then no matter how strong an opponent's combat skills were, it was possible for them to die without knowing why. A clear example would be Hurricane Vice Admiral Kalangos, who clearly possessed the mystical item, Creeping Hunger, and had an overall combat strength of a Sequence 5, but he still died in a rather inexplicable manner. Most of this was thanks to Azek, but one couldn't dismiss the role of the Spectator. due to the fact that the majority of the Beyonder jobs below the high sequence had distinct characteristics and obvious weaknesses with weak bodies. If one could conceal one's strengths and understand the situation of their enemies beforehand, it wasn't impossible for them to defeat someone stronger. In extreme cases, there was still a very small chance of a Sequence 9 killing a Sequence 5. Of course, this was a perfect hypothesis, but in reality, it was almost impossible. Sequence 5 was already considered strong, and the corresponding Beyonder powers could be considered miraculous. Strengths could effectively cover up weaknesses, but before reaching Sequence 6, it was very difficult to cause any effect on them. On the other hand, many of the Beyonders below high sequences were very afraid of being attacked by a group, even if their opponents were all below their own sequence. This was because once one became flustered, their attempts to avoid a fault would lead to failure of another. Their weaknesses could lead to fatal outcomes. These problems were why shepherds were ranked first below high sequences. They were so all-rounded that if they combined and matched their Beyonder powers well enough, they would almost have zero shortcomings. After I advance to the Sequence 7, I'll have all sorts of magical Beyonder powers. Then, even if I encounter a Sequence 6, I'll be able to contend against them for a while, and I might even be able to win. If I encounter a Sequence 5, there might still be a chance of escaping. As his thoughts raced, Klein looked around, waiting for someone to speak. If Bard and Light Suppliant can't be sold, then I can only go for second best and consider selling Spectator and Telepathist. In consideration of Beyonder characteristics' indestructibility and conservation, the formula of my own pathway definitely shouldn't be sold. The Witch pathway wouldn't as well, for it would lead to many tragic cases. Whether it's Instigator or Witch, they're the type that necessitates committing evil deeds. Klein was a little nervous, but his face remained expressionless as he waited. Actually, I can consider buying it. At that moment, the chubby apothecary laughed. I can also accept another apprentice and give him these 2 formulas, making him specialize in praying for light to shine on my herbs. Perfect. How extravagant. His words broke the momentary silence in the room. A man in the corner, who had his hood pulled very low, spoke in a deliberately sharp voice. Perhaps I can give it to my child. At least it's stronger than my sequence. Sequence 9, 200 pounds, Sequence 8, 400 pounds. If you agree, we have a deal. To be able to take out 600 pounds at one go means he's quite rich. That's enough to buy a house in Tingen City. Klein pretended to think, looked at the other members at the gathering, and observed their reactions. Noticing that no one had the urge to raise the price, and that the other party's bid had reached his bottom line, Klein thought for a while and said, "I'll tag on an additional request. You cannot sell these 2 formulas in this gathering, but you are free to do as you wish elsewhere." The man said sharply, "All right, Mr. Eye of Wisdom will bear witness." Klein didn't know how to prove that the formula was real, but he didn't want to ask as it would expose the fact that he hadn't participated in many gatherings. Therefore, he silently pulled up his robe and took out the 2 potion formulas he had written long ago and handed it to an attendant beside him. The attendant didn't walk to the corner. Instead, he went to the single sofa in the center and handed the folded paper over to the Eye of Wisdom. The old gentleman spread out the paper and, without taking an extra look at it, placed it on a small round table beside him. Then he took out a handkerchief and wiped his right palm. From his pocket, he took out a ring inlaid with many tiny diamonds. This ring was complicated and exquisite in design. In the middle of the ring was a dark green gem that looked like an eye. Just by looking at it from a distance, Klein felt his head swell and his body turn uncomfortable. It was just like back when he was taking his math examination. Eye of Wisdom solemnly wore the ring on his right middle finger and then closed his eyes, as if he was preparing something. Suddenly, the emerald green gem on the ring bloomed with a resplendent golden color, which was as bright as the sun. Eye of Wisdom quickly extended his right hand and let the gem touch the potion formula written by Klein. The rays of golden light became purer until they eventually turned into a holographic projection. "Authentic and effective," Eye of Wisdom announced in a low voice. He immediately removed the ring from his finger, not daring to wear it for another second. His tone sounds just like a notary. That ring is the most prized item in Mr. Eye of Wisdom's collection, sealed artifact 2081. It emulates the powers of a notary. Klein watched on thoughtfully, feeling a little covetous. After the notarization, the deal was quickly concluded, and Klein received a thick wad of cash, all in 10-pound notes. After counting the bills 3 times, he didn't fold and put them in his pocket. Instead, he held them in the palm of his hand and waited for an opportunity to spend them. He planned on observing for a moment to ensure that there was nothing he needed, before speaking again, to mention his desire to purchase things. At that moment, the apothecary looked around and said, "I brought a few bottles of sedatives." He really brought it. I've already forgotten all about it. In order to be different from his past self, Klein could only pretend that he wasn't around. After shouting a few times and seeing that there was no response, the apothecary muttered, "That guy didn't come this time. Maybe he's dead somewhere. Thank you for your blessings, but it's delightful that you failed to recognize me." Klein heaved a sigh of relief. The apothecary habitually asked for Spring of the Elves marrow crystals again, but it was in vain as usual. Moments after he shut up, a woman whose face was completely shrouded by her hood said with 2 boxes at her feet, "I have 2 weapons with Beyonder effects." This must be the lady who sold the inscribed steel sword the last time, right? My spirituality instincts as a seer tells me that. She has another 2 similar weapons. Backing her is some Beyonder armament organization, right? Well, maybe she has an artisan behind her, also known as Sequence 6 of the Machinery Specialist and Savant Pathway. Klein looked over with anticipation. He had agreed to give the son a Beyonder weapon worth 500 to 700 pounds, which could effectively his combat ability. He didn't promise the specific type and characteristics. So long as it was similar and could be used, he could buy it. In any case, the son wasn't picky about it.